Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Going to start off with the World Health Organization Director General's statement today that there will be no return to the old normal for the foreseeable future. He said, look, let me be blunt. Too many countries are heading in the wrong direction. They point out that, and as he says, the virus is public enemy number one. And he goes on to say the actions of too many of these governments and people reflect that we're just not doing what needs to be done. He says if the basics aren't followed, there is only one way this pandemic is going to go, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And, it's one of those things where I go, yeah, no kidding. Here's the thing. A record 230,000 new cases globally on Sunday. 230,000 more cases. That brings the total number of infections up to about 13 million worldwide. And those are only the ones, again, that we've tested. I keep coming back to that. It's only the folks that we've tested. What I find interesting is, and on a very positive note, Sunday, while the globe experienced its biggest day, on the day that Florida had its biggest day, New York City reported no deaths from the virus. First time since the beginning of this. You go, they're trying. They're from the people that I've talked to, they're actually trying to do the social distancing. They're wearing masks. They're doing what they can. And it's sort of paying off. Now, Florida went the opposite direction, and on Sunday saw a record 15,299 reported new cases, which is, wow, blown everybody else out of the water. You see now in California, for instance, things are going the wrong way there. They've ordered to shut businesses down again. No bars, no restaurants, no nail salon. I hope you got your hair cut because it's probably going to be a while. Indoor dining done, movie theaters done, museums done, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Because they've been averaging, almost 9,000 new cases a day. And this is one of those things where these are, again, only the people that we're testing. And the reason I bring this up is because we're talking about opening the schools up in the fall. There's conversations all over the place. You've got Trump saying that it has to be done. You got billionaire Betsy DeVos, basically forcing the ticket there. And you've got hundreds of thousands of kids that they're talking about forcing back into classrooms that I don't know if you've ever had a child in a classroom where one of the kids had head lice and then everyone had it. This is more contagious than the head lice. You actually have to kind of come in contact, physical contact, to get the head lice. Wear a hat, put your heads together. Imagine just breathing in a classroom. This is the really interesting part of this, because we can't control the spread of head lice, let alone a airborne pathogen. And it's one of these moments where you just kind of worry that the leadership on every level, especially on our Republican friends, is just insane. And I know it comes from the top. It comes from Donald Trump. It's all a hoax. If you saw over the weekend, they went after Dr. Fauci, which you knew was coming, because Fauci's been saying, look, we got to do all of the things that we know work. Isolation, contact tracing. We got to stay away from large groups. You got to now wear the mask thing. And, the administration decided, instead of doing the right thing, that it's time to go after Fauci. And while simultaneously you've got Trump attacking Fauci, you've got him retweeting a game show host The right-wing crank Chuck Woolery tweeted out that this is all, it's everyone's lying. It's all, think about this for a second. Chuck freaking Woolery, who I thought was dead 100 years ago, is being retweeted by the president for his brilliance, which is the most outrageous lies are the ones about COVID-19. Everyone, he says, is lying. Everyone. The CDC, media, Democrats, our doctors, not all, but most, that we were told to trust. He says, I think about it. I think about all about the election and keeping the economy from coming back, which is what about the election. He says, I'm sick of it. And Trump retweets this. And what do you think the moron minions all the way down the chain who see this think? Which is why you see the Karens and the Kens, the QAnon Karens running around the local stores like it's summer in paradise. Like not a care in the world. And basically the hell with everybody else. And the thing is some interesting numbers have popped out. They're saying a new study that just came out by Families USA, 5.4 million people who lost their jobs have lost their health insurance because of this pandemic. I got to tell you, I think the number's got to be higher than that. But they're saying that 5.4 million had lost their insurance between February and May. Now, how many of those people were able to pick up ACA plans? I don't know. But the sad reality is let's say you do get the virus and you don't have health insurance. I know popular belief is the stimulus bill will pay for it. It will not. I know popular belief is we're doing all of this testing. We're not. And what's worrisome to me, and I got into this a little bit today. I tweeted out this story about Florida hitting 15,299 in new cases on Sunday, and for that I was called a headline reading hack because I do read the headlines, but I did read the story, and the story said that 15,299 people, new people, got sick. Tested positive for the disease, shattered Florida's record, shattered the previous record of 11,458. Blew right on past what California had set at almost 11,700, and went right on past New York's 11,600. So we're talking big day. So this guy sends me an image that I'm sure some right-wing think tank put up. There's no sourcing on this image. So I have no idea that it's accurate. But I looked at it and I said, well, let's just argue that it's God honest true. It still shows a single day high of 15,299 people who tested positive for the disease. That means 15,299 more people as of Sunday were walking around having conversations, living with, being around all kinds of other people, which means there's a lot more people out there. But he sends me this image with this information in it, that his belief was the reason the 15,299 was so explosive is they nearly doubled the testing. They did almost 143,000 tests to come up to that 15,299 number. Which anybody who knows, to get the test, you have to have some symptoms. You have to have a reason. You can't just walk in and go, you know what? I'm going over to Granny's today. I'd like to be tested so I know that I'm not an asymptomatic carrier. You can't do that. You should be able to. There should be a way to do that. We should be able to do it in our homes. It should be quick. It should be cheap. It should be something we're doing often so that, you know what? If we are asymptomatic carriers, we can stay the hell away from everybody else. Just a thought. So he sends me this as if I know something you don't, because the percentage of people getting it is down. But without understanding that still 15,299 people are now sick with this virus. Even if you're doing more testing. And this is what I argued what they should have done from the beginning. Test freaking everybody. Everybody. This way you could say only a small percentage of the population has it. This is where this graph wants this guy to go. He just hasn't figured it out yet. So I'm looking at this and okay, so almost 11.25% of the people who have taken the test are now sick. So that means if you extrapolate this to the larger population, if you're arguing that only 11% of the population has it, we're talking an awful lot of people walking around sick. That means the chances of bumping into somebody who has it, pretty good. 1 in 10 people, you walking down the street, you could bump into somebody. But the guy's not going to get this because it doesn't fit the narrative that this isn't a big deal, that this isn't a problem. No, this is a problem. And it's such a big problem that Mick Mulvaney, and you may remember Mick Mulvaney's name, former congressman, former Trump chief of staff. He's now a special envoy for Northern Ireland. He actually wrote an op-ed basically laying out what I said. Our testing capacities are crap. We're nowhere near where we need to be. We've got to pick up the ball because his son, and this is what happens. It's got to hit you right between the eyes. Evidently, his kid, they had tested, met the criteria to get the test. They had to wait. Oh my God. Because understand, this is a guy who's not used to waiting for anything. They had to wait 5 to 7 days to get the test results back. Can you imagine how these people's heads were about to explode for 5 to 7 days to wonder if their kid has this virus? Because understand, these are people who are not used to waiting for things like this. You and I, we're pretty much used to it. We're used to waiting for that phone call. We're used to waiting for the office to get back to us. And if we call and bug them, it usually takes even longer. They're not. And it's just one of these things where you go in and you look at, even someone like Mulvaney now is turning around and going, you know what, we do need to figure out how to test people more quickly. We do need to get test results back. We need to do some of that smart stuff, like testing and tracing and isolating, the stuff that we know that works. Maybe just kind of a thought. And the thing that gets me is, we see all across this country just obscene displays of insanity. We see all of these big parties in the Ozarks, hundreds, if not thousands of people packed into a small area. Michigan, you had, hundreds of people packed into this 4th of July party where you couldn't see any room between them. Now we find out, oh, well, gee, there was somebody in the crowd who was sick. And, oh, well, a bunch of people are now sick with it. Gee, I wonder how that happened. If only someone could explain to us that being in large crowds was a bad idea. That breathing on each other in confined spaces is how this damn virus, it's how it contracts across the population. And how we get to the point where in Florida, you got 15,299 people in one single day testing positive for it. And yes, I know, again, they did a little bit more testing. Still, what if they, instead of only doing 123,000, what if they did 1 million? Would it then concern you that maybe 115,000 people are now sick? Would that then concern you, or would we still fall back on, oh, it's a hoax? Chuck Woolery is right. It's all a hoax. It's the Democrats who have done this. They just want to win the election. No, the Democrats just don't want to die. That seems pretty simple to me. This isn't a political issue, so stop making it one. Stop making not wearing a mask your political statement. How about we talk about sanity? How about we talk about science? How about we figure out how to have this not be the end of what was normal? How about we turn back what the World Health Organization Director General said? How about we do what we need to do so we can go back to something of the old normal? Just kind of a thought. But I got a lot to get to today, a lot to talk about. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a whole bunch of stuff I got on the agenda. But, the know-nothing GOP at the top of it. But Greg Hurwitz is going to be here, New York Times best-selling author, going to share some thoughts on that. Also, the Roger Stone situation. So much to get to. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up. a voice to win on the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1995. That was the day 2,500 pressmen, reporters, drivers, and clerks went out on strike against the Detroit News and the Free Press. Both newspapers had created a virtual monopoly in 1988 by merging their advertising and circulation departments into the Detroit Newspaper Association. Even as the DNA raked in record profits, they forced years of concessions, including wage freezes and layoffs. When the association implemented a merit pay raise system, the newspaper guild voted to strike. 5 other unions, including CWA and the Teamsters, soon followed. The newspapers, however, were ready. Just before the strike, they cut off the dues checkoff. They also contracted with the company Alternative Workforce to provide scabs. They also hired private security guards from Huffmaster and Vance International to enforce the scab herding. A solid union boycott cut revenues for both newspapers. On August 19th, hundreds of strikers stopped scabbing until police attacked the picket lines, breaking arms and arresting at least 4. Then, on Labor Day weekend, thousands of strikers and supporters successfully repulsed police forces amassed from across the state to break up the picket lines. By mid-September, both newspapers were forced to airlift the Sunday edition until strike-breaking injunctions limited picket lines. Over 100 had been arrested over the course of several weeks. Unable to stop production, strikers gradually returned to work until the strike was finally called off in February of 1997. In his 2-volume set, Workers in America, Robert Weir notes that many labor activists criticized strike tactics. They argued direct action to stop production should have been the priority rather than boycotts and political pressure. Once the strike ended, the DNA claimed all but a few had forfeited their jobs.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So if pandemic isn't bad enough, if California's shutting the bars down and the tattoo parlors and can't get your nails and your hair done anymore because the virus has kicked up, they're saying that the next year could be quite dangerous in California as the chances of a large earthquake on the San Andreas Fault has jumped pretty sizably. In fact, they say it's risen from 0.023% all the way up to 2.3%, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but I got to tell you, if only 2.3% of the time the gun was going to go off to my head, I would still not be thrilled to pull that trigger. So again, this is another one of those things where, man, it just seems to be getting worse. And the dumber we get, I guess the more we just forget about this stuff. It's just scary times. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top news of the day, I've asked our good friend Greg Horowitz to come and talk with us. He's a New York Times best-selling author and also a political activist. Greg, thanks for taking time for us.
Absolutely. After that introduction, I'm here in California, so I'm a little bit worried that 2.3% we're going to wind up in a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson movie.
I hope your books are all glued together and nailed down. But here's the weird thing. I mean, when I saw that story, I'm like, wow, lightning's probably going to strike. The earthquakes are going to happen because Trump wore a mask over the weekend while simultaneously calling the whole thing a hoax.
Yeah, he tore a hole in the great chain of being, all right. So now we're going to start to see earthquakes and floods and rains of frogs.
But isn't that what the right wing wants? Isn't that what the evangelicals want? I actually had a couple of evangelicals tell me that the reason they were voting for Trump back in 2016 was because he was going to bring on the end of times. We were going to get to see God in our lifetime. The rapture was coming.
Yeah, that's less convincing if your last name is Hurwitz, but I understand the sentiment. I think we're starting to see some real cracks in all these bases. And I think that, part of the thing I've been thinking a lot about this, of how we address this, you and I talked a little bit about last time about how we find optimism. I think there's a different kind of message to Trump voters who I view very differently than I view Trump. And part of the message is I think they already won and accomplished their aim. I think they expressly wanted somebody in who was a non-expert, who was a non-elite. And the reasons for that aren't entirely horrific. If you look at how bad things have gotten, you're a union guy, you look at working class wages in the last 40 years under Democrats and Republicans, you look at stuff like, 1 out of 3 adult Black men is in prison. There's all sorts of systemic problems that have been happening and happening and happening. And I think that part of it was people got to a point that they said, I don't care what it's going to be. It won't be another Bush or another Clinton. It just can't be that. And I think that part of the ways we can talk about this to some of the voters who we hope to reach is to say, look, you did it. It was fun for a while. You elected a guy who likes to put his thumb in the fingers of the elite, some of whom deserved it, but, some of whom have been spouting off too much and too sanctimoniously from red carpets. But the thing is you also know that that guy who you want to blow everything up is not the guy to rebuild. And if we look at where we are now with this pandemic, with our economy, with issues of race, I think that there's a version of us saying, we understand it. Joe Biden is the other choice. We all know he's not a rabid socialist. He's just not, right? We can catch our breath, right? We've got the signal from everyone from the white working class to the discussions about race. And we did it. Like, you guys got everybody's attention in a horrific way. And if we do what is the right thing to do now, like, let this be maybe one of the positive points. If we can have this be the nadir and not the nadir that's going to come with 4 more years.
Right. So what do you say to someone like Bruce Bartlett, who has, I think, a really great piece out it's titled "The GOP's Murderous Anti-Intellectualism," where he talks about, the Republican Party right now being the know-nothing party. And basically what you said, you want to tear things down, and being the any smart person is to be disbelieved and mocked and ridiculed, and just these kind of insane conspiracy theories are what grab hold of them. What do you say to someone like that? Because what you're saying is, look, if I'm getting this right, people are angry. And I've been saying this for a long time. I grew up believing if you worked hard, you played by the rules, you got ahead. That isn't reality for most people today. The path to the middle class for most people has been just diverted or destroyed. So you're saying that people are just angry about that. Bartlett, I think, is going in a whole different direction, where he's saying, look, we've cultivated really stupid people to believe really crazy things. That to me is a lot more dangerous than what you're arguing.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing. There's a difference between what my visceral reaction to that is as a, textbook, elite educated. I mean, however you want to fill in the blanks, right? I'm the guy who is.
You're the smart guy.
Well, I wouldn't say the smart guy. I'm the guy who has, the right degrees and came, I was born in the San Francisco Bay Area. I went to schools on the East Coast. The thing is I think that there's something that's beneath it. And I feel like there's 2 things we can do. We can be really angry and flamethrowy, which we need to have. We need to have that part of the party. But part of it too is I do think that we need to understand that for a lot of people, I mentioned this to you last time, Alyssa Slotkin has a quotation. There was a guy when she was running for office, worked on an assembly line, car line. And he said to her, look, for 40 years, my life has been a straight line going down. It doesn't matter if it's a Clinton, if it's an Obama, or if it's a Bush in office. I work harder and harder for less and less. I pay more and more for less healthcare. I consider myself a stage 4 cancer victim, and Trump is the experimental chemo. And I believe that if we're going to talk to them, we're now out of the racket banging outrage and pain, which is all valid. I'm not discounting that. If we're into the point of trying to talk to those voters who we need, right? 77,000 swing voters, or 77,000 voters in 3 states. We need to be able to understand and connect to their motivations in voting for Trump all the way down before we earn the right to try to change their mind. And that's a different thing than when we're getting out the vote and when we're talking in California and when we're venting our pain and outrage. These are very different lanes. And I think there's room for all of them. We need the passionate people. We need the passionate activists, but we also have to figure out how to get those people, because this election is too important. We need to shave numbers off and voters off in ways that are valid and convince them everywhere. We need more Hispanic and African-American turnout. We need swing voters. We need suburban women. We need 1 or 2% more of the evangelical vote. We need everything. We need to be talking to everyone everywhere because the stakes are just too high.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And as I said back in 2016, the white working class of this country, and I would argue the entire working class, not just whites, bought into the vision that we were going to bring back the 1950s. We're going to bring back all those factories and those union jobs that paid, family sustaining wages, where you could actually live on one income. And still move forward as a family. Those days are long gone, but people want to go back to that. People want to believe that that's possible.
Another thing that's interesting, Rick, is if you get off Twitter and get off the sort of the Sturm und Drang of the political discourse. I remember when Doug Jones won, it was such an important race. And it's like, who really knew it mattered was African-American voters, right? 97% of African-American women, 95% of that community, they knew what was at stake, right? They understood that because whatever bad happens or whatever bad backlash lands hardest on them. And one of the things that was interesting is I was looking at some of the polling from that. And if you look at the ranked values and needs for a platform from a party among those voters, it was essentially anti-corruption, healthcare, jobs, education. And one of the realizations that we had in my team that was kind of looking at this, because we were spending a lot of time trying to talk about reaching working class voters in Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, was we tend to think of all these different groups, like there's millennials and there's African Americans and there's the white working class. At the end of the day, the overlap of those values and the overlap of their concerns and cares is enormous and unifying. The African American community in Alabama has a lot of the exact same concerns ranked the same way as white working class guys in Michigan and in Ohio. And we try and like tease all this apart, but what do people want? They want their work to matter, right? They want to have health care. They don't want their kid needing an insulin to die because they can't afford an insulin shot. They want to be able to switch jobs without it disrupting everything and being trapped in a situation. They want to have education. They want to have opportunity. And the stuff that we tend to think that carves up the Democratic Party into a bunch of different Democratic parties based on a lot of the noise we hear from the more vocal members of different subcommunities, all of whom have important and valid points of view, tends to get us distracted from the fact that there's a huge core group of people, all the way from MAGA voters to Bernie voters, who share a common set of values and concerns. And how do we talk in a language that's understanding that there have been significant unaddressed injustices, both in African-American community, in the way that we've let, venal corporatism override, innovation in a free market even, right? Country Club Mitt Romney conservatives should be worried about that, right? Certainly. How do we roll all this together? And in a weird way, as much as people say, well, I'm not wildly excited about Biden, in a lot of ways, he's the perfect candidate because we can all look at him and say, look, we're going to catch our breath. He cannot be as Wall Street a candidate as Hillary and even Obama were, because he just can't in this environment. He's going to have to accommodate, a variety of more justice geared people around him. We're going to have to address some of these problems. And it's a good solution for us to catch our breath, I think, and then figure out where we're going.
Right. And I look, Biden's most recent plans that he just came out with, I'm excited about it. The idea of rebuilding our infrastructure, having a Buy American plan, talking about, bringing back manufacturing for core national security issues like this pandemic. I mean, the one thing that this pandemic, I think, has done across party lines is it's highlighted the fact that we're way too dependent on China, which is why I think you see Trump and the Republicans really trying to make this a central issue, which I've been saying for a while. The Democrats had better come up with something of a plan to take on China and not be the apologists saying, oh, we China's our friend and China's not a problem, because this is going to be the central issue, I think, in this campaign.
Well, and it's also interesting because I think a lot of people I think about this a lot if we take it out of context and you think of, let's talk about suburban middle class to upper middle class who aren't touched at, who still have pensions and can participate in the stock market, right? Who are untouched by the racial concerns of injustice that happens in different neighborhoods. For a lot of them, there's an ability in the past to kind of float above and disconnect from politics. It doesn't really affect their lives that much on a day-to-day basis. with the mismanagement of COVID and the destruction of our economy, with parents who are dying, with schools who are shut down, it's no longer a situation that we can afford to be angry and want to own the libs because they can be snotty and condescending. As much as we need to, as a party, need to look in the mirror about the ways that we talk to people, and I think approach different communities in America with a bit more humility. I also think that this is now, it's undeniable what incompetent and corrupt presidential leadership leads to. It leads to people dying around us. It leads to an overtaxing of our resources. It leads to our kids home underfoot, our parents dying, and people who we know in the hospital. And there's no fooling around. And I think some of those people who grew up in the middle, like me, are starting to feel, if you didn't understand the effects of having the wrong person and wrong value set in office, they're feeling it now at their front door.
Yeah, I think you're right, and this is one of those moments. So then, how do we use this moment? And I don't want this to be politicized, but how do you take this moment and wake those folks up to where they then come back and say maybe the Trump experiment was a bad idea?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot of it is to say, I mean, look, this is one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, let's say Hillary Clinton had won the election. Where would we be right now in our discussions of race? Like, as awful as like, I mean, George Floyd, some of the stuff that we have witnessed that is blown out in the open is so horrific. It's difficult to watch, right? It's difficult to almost engage with.
Agree.
But it's out there. It's there now. I don't think we would be there. We'd be more close to business as usual. I don't think we would be there of saying, you know what, guys, the fact that we haven't seen an improvement in real wages in 40 years, we have to talk about and address. I think that we would feel good about being sort of sufficiently liberal. And I think we would still be maintaining a lot of the structures and the values. You know, Hillary Clinton, I voted for her. I supported her. I think she's a staggeringly brilliant woman. I think she was incredibly capable for the office. Her tune on Wall Street has changed a good amount. She does represent a kind of consolidated power that people can argue that Biden represents, but Biden's going to wake up to this moment. He just is going to have to. And I do feel like, in a weird way, if we can get this on course, if we can have the humility and insight to get this whole mess on course and embrace enough of the people we need to embrace and hold true to our core values for the people who we have been relying on again and again to deliver us elections, like the African-American community, and deliver wins for our party. If we can manage to do that, this could be an incredibly painful moment that leads to an incredible and different kind of rebirth than I think we would be able to be if we were right here getting ready to send Hillary Clinton into her second term in a much more competently, better managed, just administration. I don't think we'd be awake. I would not be awake the way that I am. I kind of thought democracy was fine without me, and I could donate here and there and do my own things and do my own parts. So,
yeah, I'm listening and I'm hearing what you're saying, and I love your optimism. I really do, but I'm not seeing I'm struggling with the good in Donald Trump being elected. I'm still struggling with that. But I get what you're saying, and I think you're right on a certain level that we wouldn't be looking at the systematic problems that have been going on for generations, the destruction of a prosperous working class, the slow march down the hill. I think you're right. My problem is the uncertainty of the other side now. What does this look like?
There's no way to spin it lightly or well. And I don't mean to be flippant about it. I just mean anytime that we're in a situation that feels this dire, and the Roger Stone thing is, it's another of the endless last nails in an endlessly, refusing to be nailed shut coffin. What can we do aside from say, how do we take all this pain and suffering and even, embarrassment, right? And at this point, what do we do now?
Right.
And all we can do now is wake up as much as we possibly can and figure out how to put this mess back together. You said something interesting to me right before we went on. I was joking about, everyone's going to be tired till November 4th. And you said that's when the work begins. And that's exactly right. the incredibly difficult work of governance, right? Of building imperfect alliances that are good. Like if we want to get laws and passed that are proper laws, if we want to get HR1 through, that's anti-corruption bill, it's going to be an imperfect process of incremental change. This doesn't end even if it's Biden. If it's Trump, we know what happens, right? And we're all in it for 4 more years and we'll do what we do because we're going to have to. But you're absolutely right that the unbelievable hard actual work of governance, not politicking and not messaging, is going to begin on that day. And we got to bring a whole country with us.
No, you're right. And my hope is that it is a landslide victory, and that, a large portion, Biden goes in with a sizable mandate, and that we don't do what we did in 2008 when Obama became president and everybody go back to whatever the hell they were doing before, that we do stay engaged and we do stay active and we do take this pain. And you're right. These have been painful years, that we take the lessons from this and move forward. Because I think a lot of us in this pandemic, I think has been a big part of the awakening. I think a lot of us are realizing how tenuous our situations are and how close to the poverty that we're possibly at.
That's right. It's funny too, to take, I've had it's so hard when you look at you remember that Van Jones statement when he talked about the Hillary Clinton voter being dangerous?
Right.
What was your reaction to that?
I'm not a Van Jones fan. So, I said just Van Jones being Van Jones.
I see.
I was nowhere near
my first reaction when I hear that is I get aggravated and defensive is my first reaction. And I was really thinking about it. And in a lot of ways, I don't like, or I don't like to traffic in the usual terms or buzzwords, but I was just thinking about, if you look at just our upper middle class, let's say, I had this moment where, I read a newspaper headline. And it was talking about how the airlines, I might have these figures slightly wrong, so I apologize, under TARP needed a $51 billion bailout or a $53 billion bailout. And they used all that money for stock buybacks rather than going to workers, right? And then now they need another $51 or $53 billion bailout. So essentially it was a straight wash through to all their shareholders and big bonuses. And I read this and I got really mad about it. And I was like, we got to talk about that. And we got to, like, that venal corporatism. Then I realized, I'm like, I have a pension, right? I probably hold a lot of those airlines, a lot of those stocks. I'm the guy who holds them, not wildly affluent, but I have a pension and that's how that goes. And so it was a really interesting moment of trying to kind of reconfigure it and go, I'm being angry because they're servicing the venal expectations that I've come to have by sort of unbridled corporatism. And that's weird. There's ways that this is not a free market if we're talking about those bailouts. This isn't like I invested well in companies that thrived on innovation and free market libertarian principles. We're talking bailouts and other stuff that taxpayer money gets shifted to other people. And so it was interesting. I took that Van Jones comment with a bit more reflection than my first reaction. I was really thinking about it. I was like, if we were watching a Game of Thrones episode, let's say we could distance this off into the fictional world, and Dany Targaryen rides into a new place, and the ruling class are all people who are, like me, enjoying those pensions, even though it's based on bailouts and 4 exits up the freeway or those neighborhoods. Like, what would my thinking be? How would we identify? Like, we'd think she should, kill all the ruling class. I mean, we'd have wildly radical socialist ideas, none of which I hold, right? I'm a vehement pro-capitalist. But it was really funny to try and break frame on that and reflect differently and go, okay, I'm for free market, I'm for capitalism, I'm for innovation, and I'm for inequality of outcome. I'm for equality of opportunity, but inequality of outcome. But if that system's broken in a whole bunch of ways, like the one I read in the paper and felt super angry and righteous about, that I've continued to benefit from and I've chosen not to do anything about it, that's the kind of waking up that I need to do, and that the country's done, and that Biden will have to address in some way. There's too many people who are too awake now with the corruption that has been sort of hidden.
Right.
I feel like Trump's blown it wide out into the open in a way that it's undeniable. And we all have to take a strong look at it and figure out where we're going to vote and who we're going to support, even if it's policies that might not immediately benefit certain people's tax brackets. But if it's going to build a strong thriving economy from the top down. We're not talking like Trump is about winning this quarter or this year. We want to have an economy that people who are winning and doing well can do it in 10 years and 15 years and 20 years. And so I think there's a lot of new realizations in the mix. And if we can keep taking them in and keep dodging the Putin's playbook of the fire hose controversy of the week that spins us off into other arguments while the country's being looted, essentially, we can learn about this process that's set up and we can figure out what to do about it. And I mean, you've been talking about it for years, and I feel like there is opportunity. The unknown is terrifying, but it holds equal parts opportunity as it does threat. And under Trump, it's just felt like threat. And I think that we have to try to summon our better selves and figure out what the opportunity is going to be to actually remake this properly. I don't care Democrat, Republican. I care core American values, core fairness, a true democracy, that functions, voter rights, anti-corruption, and a capitalism that's actually fair and that's actually free market.
I'm right there with you. I'm there with you. It's going to be a long road uphill. And I agree. And this is something I'm sure we'll talk about multiple times from now until Election Day. Before I let you go, I wanted to get your thoughts on the Stone thing. Were you surprised that he commuted Stone's sentence? Roger Stone was supposed to go to jail tomorrow. They have commuted it, not just his jail time, but also his house arrest and the fines and all that. Were you surprised?
I have to say, I wasn't. I'm hopeful. And this is, we'll just keep this between you and me, Rick. But I'm hopeful that part of this is a realization that Trump's going to do as much grabbing and pardoning and covering his tail for people who might, be potential allies to figure out his best plan for Trump TV. It is so brazen. It is so unbelievably, appallingly corrupt. There's no version under which if any Republican senator or congressperson questions this decision, it is undeniably un-American. It's anti-due process. There's no defending it. And so my only hope is in him committing an act that's that brazen. He's trying to just get as much looting for himself and his cronies as he can, knowing that the landscape is not looking rosy.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I was a little surprised because what has shown to me anyway, a level of loyalty that I don't think Trump has ever shown. So it made me think, what is it? Stone obviously knows where the bodies are buried because Trump doesn't do anything. And we had John Bolton on the program last week. And, he was very clear. Trump doesn't do anything that doesn't benefit Trump. So the idea that he he commuted Stone's sentence, didn't pardon him, tells me that there's got to be something there because there's no way he did it just out of the goodness of his heart or loyalty to a friend.
Can I ask you one thing? Do you have time for me to ask you one
question?
Sure,
go ahead.
What do you think the biggest concern? What is the biggest concern you have that would put Trump into a second term, aside from his illegal seizing of power or any of those things? What do you think is the biggest way Democrats could fumble between here and there?
I see the race issue as the biggest issue right now. I still believe we're a racist country. I believe that with all of the uprising and the people really, the messaging I'm getting from the right is basically trashing all of our history and basically rewriting all of the history that people were comfortable with. And I'm not arguing whether it was right or wrong, or I'm not arguing what the history was. I'm saying that people were comfortable with what they learned, the history of this country as they believed and internalized. I fear that being the thing that motivates a lot of people that maybe haven't voted. I go back to 2016. My family, basically the basket of deplorables. They lost all those jobs during the Reagan years of deindustrialization. They were never voters. What brought them to come out to vote was the idea that we were going to rebuild that manufacturing. They believed that, but they're also racist as hell. So now what I'm hearing is we're going to basically trash all of our history. We're going to take down George Washington and all of this. I see that as a trouble spot. Do I think we need to do it as a country? Certainly. I think we need to somehow figure out how to deal with our flawed past. But I fear that to be the thing that I think could swing this election.
Thank you.
So So there you go. But Greg, I appreciate the time. It's always great talking with you. I hope you'll come back and share some more with us.
You too.
Good stuff. Greg Horowitz, New York Times best-selling author. Make sure you check out his website, greghorowitz.net. We'll get links out on how you can check out his books and all of that. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1863. That was the day that draft riots broke out in New York City. The Civil War had been raging for 2 years. For the first time in United States history, the government instituted a draft lottery. But for those with enough money, they could buy their way out of the draft. For $300 or more than $5,000 in today's money, you could remove your name from the lottery. This meant that the city's working class men, many of them Irish Americans, had to fight while the wealthy could stay home. Anger in New York City mounted. The anger was stoked by anti-war newspapers and politicians. The newspapers railed against the war and the draft. They also riled up fears that more black Southerners would come to New York because of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Black men were exempted from the draft because they were not citizens. This further fueled anti-black anger amongst working class whites. On the second day of the draft, violence erupted. First, the rioters targeted government facilities, but then they turned their wrath on black New Yorkers. White dock workers destroyed dance halls and boarding houses that served black patrons near the docks. A mob burnt down an orphanage for black children, but fortunately the children escaped. 11 black men were lynched. President Lincoln sent federal militia to New York to quell the uprising. After 4 days of violence, the official death toll rose above 100, but the true number is unknown. The Martin Scorsese film Gangs of New York dramatized the draft riots. To this day, class continues to be a major factor in who fights and dies on the battlefield. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Yeah, like I said, if you take a look at Bruce Bartlett's article, Bruce Bartlett, as you know, was a policy advisor during the Reagan years. He was also a Treasury official during the H.W. Bush years. He longtime conservative, longtime, right-leaning, policy wonk. He's now turned more of away from the current Republican Party and more towards, I guess, a libertarian view, if you will. But like I said, he's got this new piece out that, it's not surprising. I've been talking about what's happened to the right wing of this country for years. This whole anti-intellectualism, the rise of the Tea Party, where facts don't matter. Trump, and look, Bartlett's right. Trump isn't the problem. It's the Republican Party as a whole. And as he writes, it's too easy to blame the situation entirely on Donald Trump's stupidity, willful ignorance, and incompetence. He said the Republican transformation into modern version of the 19th century know-nothing party has been underway for decades. And he goes into, how Eisenhower used it, how even Nixon did use this kind of know-nothingism and beating up on the intellectual class while still using them. And he even says that Reagan did the same thing. And because, as I'm reading the beginning of this article, I'm going, but you worked for Reagan. And Reagan's the reason, in my view, that we have a lot of the problems we have today because of the policy choices that we made back then. But he goes through and he very meticulously lays out in his piece, how the right wing has, pushed this pseudo populism has, just, risen these demagogues and these right-wing hacks to, positions of power, and how it's not surprising that after decades of training the Republican electorate, like Pavlovian dogs, to distrust science, to distrust anyone who's smart, to distrust any knowledge whatsoever, and get into these kind of bizarre conspiracy theories, or as he writes, anti-intellectualism also makes people far more susceptible to crackpot conspiracy theories because they're not thinking, they're not critical thinkers. And, he goes into, we should be pushing for education and pushing for an educated populace to critically think about the stuff that comes before us. So when Donald Trump said, "I love the poorly educated," that's been the position of the Republican Party for decades. And we've been saying that here for a very long time. It's just now Bruce Bartlett, who is a Reaganite, has now put this into a piece that points out where we've been. He also writes, they, being the Republican Party, know that a quality education will tend to make people dismiss the wrong-headedness and excessive simplicity of conservative worldview because education encourages critical thinking, open-mindedness, and truth-seeking. He writes, therefore, conservatives and Republicans have long denigrated college professors, intellectuals, and others among the well-educated class in order to undermine and dismiss their ideas, as well as higher education itself. And you hear this all the time. Why did you go to college? And I know everything. That's a problem. What I find amazing is the people who pushed this down our throats were people who went to our finest institutions. He points out that William F. Buckley, who is like the grandfather of conservatism, he famously used to say that he would rather have the first 2,000 names in a phone book run our government than the faculty at Harvard University. Probably because he was a Yale grad. This anti-intellectual thing, and he used it. This is what has gotten us here. And he reminded me of the speech that Bush gave to the, I think it was to the Naval Academy cadets. He said, look, or no, I guess it was to Harvard. It was the Harvard class. He said, for all of you who worked really hard and got A's, congratulations. For those of you who got C's, you too can be president. And, it was a joke, but it still kind of pushing that, that little dig at the really smart people. And this is what Bartlett's trying to get across in that, saying, look, the Republicans used to believe in smart thought. They used to believe in believing scientists. They used to believe in intellectual honesty. They used to believe in this stuff because, back during the Eisenhower years, more Republicans believed in science and knowledge than Democrats. Now that is completely flipped on its head to where, almost, like a quarter of the Republican voters believe in science, according to the polling that they've done. Which brings us to the moment that we're in. And, it wouldn't probably be this glaring if it weren't for a global pandemic, if it weren't for having to listen to someone like Anthony Fauci and having an administration at every turn trying to diminish the words that are coming out of his mouth. Is Fauci always right? No. Anybody who believes a scientist is always right doesn't quite get what science is about. It's about putting out a theory. It's about continually testing it and continually proving it's right. There are no universal absolutes. Given the pandemic that we're in, other than if you continue doing what we're doing, it's going to get worse. So by degrading Fauci, what you're doing is you're degrading the thought process that goes into how are we going to protect ourselves. And this goes right into the playbook. This is part of the Republican playbook. And I'm glad that Bartlett put this piece out because, as I said, I've been saying this stuff for years. He does go into, how it got here. And I've been saying for years, talk radio, right-wing, Fox News, this has been the classroom of disinformation for far too long. I tell people, listen to what I say and go find it. If people ask me for a source where I got this, I send out a source. We can agree or disagree over the source, but this is where this stuff comes from. What the right has done masterfully, and it's awe-inspiringly incredible what they've created. They have this incestuous pool of intellectuals who feed into disinformation campaigns. They got think tanks who feed into media outlets, in this virtual loop of misinformation. And as he points out, the average Fox voter is over misinformed, as I've been saying for years. They know a lot. Problem is, like Reagan said, there's so much that they know that isn't so. So what's the answer? Maybe Greg is right. Maybe this moment has awakened some of them to realize that there are some problems that need to be addressed. And maybe Greg's right. Maybe Trump was the experimental treatment to stage 4 cancer that we need to shock us awake. He's a smart guy. I hope he's right. I fear it's far worse than that, but I'm hoping he's right. Because at the end of this, we do have lots of problems. The fact that millions of people are uninsured, the fact that millions of people are unemployed, the fact that there is going to be a wave of foreclosures coming, and there's going to be a huge wave of poverty that is going to hit us very soon. And the question is what do the Republicans do? We were already hearing there's probably not going to be another stimulus check coming out for people. Pat Toomey is one of the people who, coming out against it. No, we can't do it. It's too expensive. Because I've been saying for a while, where are those fiscal hawks? Because we have just run a massive deficit. I mean, an incredibly massive deficit. What was it? It was something like $2.7 trillion in this 9-month period. I mean, it's an incredible amount of money. And not a peep so much from the right wing, the Tea Party types. Now, this is where you got to be honest. We're in the middle of a pandemic. I'm glad they spent the money. I'm glad that they did that because we haven't had the pain and the suffering that we could have had. And as someone highlighted to me months ago, be grateful that Hillary didn't win in this moment because the Republicans would have blocked every avenue that she would have had to try and deal with this problem, which is probably true. To which I shot back, we probably wouldn't be in this mess if Hillary had been elected. Just kind of throwing that out there. Just like 9/11, it had Al Gore won. I don't think 9/11 would have happened. I don't. I think we would have stopped. We would have stopped it. But again, I've taken crap for that over the years. And look, you can't prove or disprove. But competent leadership is something that in these moments we most certainly need. And it's something that we haven't had. So 113 days from today is election day. 113 days to pay attention, to think about every argument that Trump and the Republicans throw out because they're spending millions and millions of dollars on misinformation and on stuff to get us to believe that the pandemic doesn't exist. It's all a hoax. It's just the Democrats who want bad things to happen, which is just ludicrous on a ton of levels. But it does. It feeds into that anti-intellectualism. It feeds into the if you don't know, you might believe. You might just believe Trump when he says that it's all a hoax. It just is what it is. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Got lots to get to in hour number 2. Our good friend Propane Jane is going to be here to share some thoughts on the stone being commuted. Also, some of the protests going on. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Once again, my state of Texas is saddled with a Republican gubernatorial goober. Greg Abbott is this guy's name, and he's another incompetent right-wing ideologue whose botched handling of our state's COVID-19 crisis makes Donald Trump look like a master administrator of public health. First, as a small-minded small government zealot, Abbott obsequiously followed Trump's lead of do-nothingism, pretending the bad thing would just drift away. As a result, droves of Texans were dying, so he rushed out to express astonishment and concern. Yet, he cravenly refused to offend his corporate and far-right backers by implementing such life-saving measures as business closures, requiring masks in public, and stay-at-home orders. Worse, the little petty potentate infuriated local officials by banning them from taking protective actions in their communities. Bizarrely, Abbott declared he was focused not on preventing infections, but on making sure there were enough hospital beds for those who get infected. He might as well have bragged that providing an adequate number of graves was his priority, for sure enough, thousands more Texans were soon dying because of his incompetence. Finally, Abbott the absent was forced to enact a stay-at-home mandate, but he declared it was not a stay-at-home order. Instead, it was essential services and activities protocols. Then he got really strange. After banning local officials from requiring mask wearing, he declared he had hidden a trick door in that executive order, if they could divine the riddle. The trick was that while mayors and others could not require face masks, they could require stores, bars, offices, factories, and other businesses to require masks. This is Jim Hightower saying, "Isn't that fun? Playing pandemic word games with people's lives." Critics who say Republican leaders have no sense of humor haven't met Greg Abbott.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So good on the Texas Supreme Court, who today upheld Houston's refusing to allow the Republicans to hold their convention in person in the city of Houston. Because guess what? We're in the middle of a pandemic. People are getting sick. People are dying. But, you know, look, the state GOP in Texas still wanted to have their little shindig and hoo-ha, and the state court has shot them down. And you go somewhere else. You don't have to go to Houston for that. You can go to one of those Republican-held cities in Texas. Get them sick. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, well, the good city of Houston deciding that the GOP can't have their little shindig. I've asked our good friend Propane Jane back to share some thoughts. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So, thoughts on the good mayor, the Democratic mayor of Houston, saying nope, don't want to do it.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm happy that the courts ruled in our favor, and I think this is what was bound to happen, just based on the numbers. We talked about this early on in the pandemic, but one of the signals here locally in the city of Houston that things were serious with coronavirus back in early March was that Sylvester Turner shut down the Houston Rodeo. And this is a $1 billion event that is a well-known tradition for the city of Houston. It makes tons of money, but even then they shut that down, and that was the pattern across the state of Texas in our major cities. They shut down Fiesta in San Antonio. They shut down South by Southwest in Austin city limits in Austin. And so, again, like I've been saying, we were doing the right things when we had our city shut down, and unfortunately, Greg Abbott, put his foot down and decided that he was going to stand in the way of our leaders, our local Democratic leaders, doing what needed to be done to keep our population safe, and this is the result of that.
Yeah, I mean, the frustrating part is we were so close.
Yeah.
I mean, because, I look at New York on Sunday, said Sunday was the first day since, I forget, almost the beginning of the pandemic, that they haven't had a death from coronavirus.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing.
And it is amazing. And it shows me, had we just held out just a little longer, Had we just, participated a little longer in the couch potato Olympics and stayed the hell home, we wouldn't be having this massive upsurge in the South. And Florida's just mind blowing. Over 15,000 people on Sunday alone, were reported to have tested positive. I mean, that's an incredible number.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that you're going to continue to see these numbers be terrible as long as the Republican quote-unquote leadership in these states refuses to take the necessary measures to shut the states down. You can't get these curves down unless you shut everything back down again. It's just not possible to accomplish that. And, unfortunately, it looks like they've dug their heels in because they don't want to look like they're backtracking. They don't want to look like they've given in to the deep state and, all of that.
Right.
And so in that sense, they are more rigid and more obstinate in making very bad decisions for the public, even as the numbers are rising.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that gets me. And I had this moment today where, there are just times where you just want to scream. And you want to keep screaming until stupidity goes away.
Yeah.
And because I had tweeted out, the story of 15,299 people on Sunday in Florida tested positive, and immediately I got people saying, well, that's because they're doing more testing. There's always an excuse, and it's always a justification. It's always trying to minimize. It's always this where you go, 15,299 people got it.
I mean, and again, I think that it's such a gaslighting that's happening and a complete disavowal and dismissal of the actual weight of the situation, because when you're saying 15,000 cases, again, I think that they're just thinking of it as a number on the paper, but they're not actually thinking about, okay, what percentage of that 15,000 had a mild case versus how many had sort of a middle-of-the-road case versus how many are having a very severe case where they're requiring hospitalization, they're requiring an ICU bed, they need to be put on a ventilator, and then ultimately how many of those people are not going to survive this and are going to die because of this. And then again, what percentage of that people are going to survive it but then have long-lasting, if not, lifelong consequences from having the virus itself. I think they're still thinking about it like this is getting the common cold or this is just getting a regular, ordinarily, seasonal flu that we're used to thinking about, and they're not actually thinking about the level of impairment and level of suffering that is attached to those numbers that are coming out every day.
Yeah, I had someone send me this info thing, image, and like I said at the beginning, I don't know if it's accurate information because it wasn't sourced, but they're saying of the people tested on Sunday, there were like 142,000 tests done, and it was a testing rate of like I think 11.25%.
Right.
And I'm going, but if you were to test the entire population, would that 11.25 still play out? I mean, you're talking about Florida's population is about 22 million people.
Yeah.
If that's the case, you've got over 2 million people walking around carrying this virus. The chances of you bumping into one of them are really pretty good, and the chances of that 2 million going to 4 and 6 and 10, pretty good as well if you don't do smart stuff now.
Absolutely. And I tweeted a statistic the other day that the estimates are that 90% of the United States population has not received a coronavirus test. 90%.
Right.
So that means, again, that, that doesn't necessarily mean that, all of that 90% doesn't have the coronavirus. Certainly there may be many of us who are asymptomatic carriers who actually, have had it or currently have it and just aren't demonstrating any symptoms. But if we were to go out, around other people, we could spread it to who knows how many people. And because of how limited the testing ability is, in a lot of places, you can't get tested unless you're symptomatic.
Right.
And unless you have a doctor's order that says you're symptomatic and they've seen you and blah, 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 blah. So again, if you have it but you're asymptomatic, you don't have a fever, you don't have any reason for a doctor to say, yes, they have symptoms that means they need a test, then you wouldn't know that you need to present yourself for testing, and you're staying away from these long, now hours-long lines where, it's almost impossible to get tested even after you wait that long.
Did you see the article that Mick Mulvaney wrote yesterday?
No, I didn't.
Evidently, the former chief of staff, his son, they had tested, and he was, just beyond himself that they had to wait, almost 7 days.
Oh, goodness.
For the results. And, understand, this is somebody who doesn't wait. This is someone who's not accustomed to having to wait, 5 minutes, let alone 7 days. And, he's now come out and said, we've got a testing problem. We need to be able to, basically what we've talked about a million times, that, this stuff has got to be quicker, that we should figure out a way to, even home test. If we can home test for pregnancy, we should be able to home test at least something to say, hey, maybe you might want to go get the real test.
Right.
Something. But are we any closer to any reality like that?
Well, but, okay, I'm sorry. The audacity of this man, though, to, actually be appalled. Is he appalled?
Yeah.
Is he shocked? I mean, I don't know. He worked for this administration.
I putting all of that aside, I'm simply using him as a now, as a Trumpite, now coming to having a come to Jesus moment because, it's his kids behind. It's not just yours or mine.
Right. I mean, I understand that aspect, but again, I think the overarching problem is still that, the hope for some innovation or some, expedited effort to ramp up testing and tracing and to actually get a handle on how bad this virus is spreading across America. The issue is that for us to do all of those things, that requires, again, a functional federal government that isn't motivated by trying to suppress this data and suppress the fact that Trump is a disaster and that he's handling this very poorly.
You're right. It's so much easier just to retweet Chuck Woolery, who says it's all just a big hoax.
Absolutely. And just to take whatever backlash and say, oh, well, I didn't really mean it, and oh, it was an accident, and blah, 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 blah. And then we're caught up in that aspect and the silly season of, did he really mean this or did he really not mean this? But then we're not talking about the fact that he's totally incompetent and atrocious. I think that that's sort of the point, is just to mire us in all of these aspects that really don't get to the root of the issue and solve any problem.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I mean, he did wear a mask, and it only took 135,000 people dead before he did it, but he did wear a mask.
Yeah, which, again, to me means very little, because when you one day come out and wear this mask and then, it doesn't even take, 24, 48 hours for you to come out and take this stance as an entire administration of Fauci is out to get me and you can't, listen to anything he says. The CDC has bad actors in it, and, all of this casting aspersions on our established experts and scientists who are trying to get us out of this mess. Ultimately, his whole goal is still to undermine the best people we have on the job at trying to get us to solutions and save lives. So that in and of itself, I don't care how many times he comes out wearing a mask, he's contradicting any displays that he does on that end by not actually, putting the government resources in place to actually support an effort to get these numbers down and flatten the curve. He ultimately wants to keep the economy roaring. He wants to create this facade that all systems are go, and he's commander-in-chief, and everything's a steady ride, and the stock market looks great, and we're making all this money. And that just doesn't fit with having to shut everything back down and have these unemployment numbers and everything go down south, again, because the Republican Party is not going to do a sufficient economic stimulus.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, because I've had a couple of people say, you know what, we're clearly not going to, as a society, wear masks. We're not going to stop going to beach parties. We're not going to stop doing the things that we've seen all over the news, and we've seen where things have spread. We're obviously not going to have the dim among us get on board. What do you say to the person who goes, we're just gonna have to power through this. We're gonna have to, take it on the chin. We're gonna have to, fight it however we may, and whatever comes out on the other side is what we come out with.
I mean, I think that would be great if science could get on the same page with that, and biology could get on the same page with that. But that's not what's going to happen. The virus is going to do what it does. It's going to spread in our population because it's tied to human behavior. Anytime you have a public health crisis, the reason that becomes a crisis is because it's tied to human behavior and hoping against hope that people make better decisions than they ordinarily would make. And again, it's like I always talk about with hitting rock bottom. I think this, unfortunately, is a situation where we're going to continue to see these outbreaks in various states because people are not doing what they need to do. They aren't just taking the scientists and the experts at their word of, hey, you really should wear a mask. They're wanting to be defiant. They're wanting to say they have, God-given rights to not wear a mask or whatever. And again, there are going to be consequences to that. And if it does come to a point where our cities are grinding to a halt because our hospitals are grinding to a halt, because our first responders are grinding to a halt, because our law enforcement is grinding to a halt, then that's going to be where it's too late, right? I mean, obviously, we're going to have to become reactionary at that point. But it may actually get to that point because we're not doing taking the steps that we need to take to prevent that kind of chaos from happening.
Right, because even if the guy who sent me the little info thing is right, and it's only 11% of the population gets it, that's still well more than our healthcare system could come anywhere near handling, isn't it?
Oh, it's way more. I mean, we already don't have enough beds. These hospitals are already underfunded. And they already, in many places, were on the brink of closing just due to people not being able to pay their medical bills. That's already a problem that we had in America for decades. This is what was the underpinning of the whole Obamacare debate. And so, again, that system is under sustained stress. Then you have Trump come in and the Republican Party come in and do everything they could to dismantle the gains that were made with Obamacare, so that the public health infrastructure, even the private healthcare infrastructure, is not strong enough just at baseline to sustain our population. We already know that. We already know we have tens of millions still uninsured. So then when you put the pandemic on top of that, it just basically is like trying to fish, water out of a sinking boat with your hands. It's just you can't do it unless you have either money or more resources poured into the system. You can't create doctors and nurses and all of these healthcare professionals overnight. That takes time. That takes years.
Yeah, and from the reports that I'm hearing, and you work in this profession, so you would probably know better than I would. But I'm reading that they're wearing out, and they're talking about leaving. I mean, at some point, you just got to go. Like the kid in the dike, the finger in the dike, and it isn't helping. Hit high ground.
Absolutely. And I mean, that for me, that was the story for me, that even though I loved working in acute care, working in the hospital setting, working in the clinic setting, that like many other physicians in America and across the world, there was a burnout factor. And so I thankfully left being in those intensive settings well before this pandemic hit. And thank God I did that. Because if I were still in that environment, I would be terrified. My life would be totally different right now. And I think if you are somebody who's worked in this environment where you already know you're under-resourced and underfunded, and you're constantly having to battle for just the basic stuff you need need to do your job, and then a crisis like this hits, and you don't even have the basic support of PPE. You don't have PPE. You have to protest to get PPE. And you're trying to go to work every day and save people's lives and keep people safe, and it becomes even more of a thankless job. So I think that there is going to be a question of retention, and how do you keep people in these settings when, the reimbursement is not good, and, as a country, we just haven't decided to prioritize these systems like Medicaid, like Medicare, that really are supposed to be the safety net when a crisis like this hits, but are just really insufficient to cover, and this moment really proves it.
Yeah. Let's move along. I got a couple of things I wanted to ask you about outside of this, because we could beat this around for a while.
Oh, we could for years.
Clearly, sadly, this has become a right versus left or sanity versus insanity issue. But let's go to something crazier. Roger Stone, thoughts on the clemency?
Yeah, I think this is just more abuses of power. It's more like, look at me, you can't catch me. For Trump, he's in this moment where everybody's saying he's incompetent. His approval rating is going down every week. The polls look very bad. They're having to selectively give him certain polls that make it seem like he isn't trailing Joe Biden the way that he is. And so I think that this is a way for him to overcompensate and puff out his chest and build up his really fragile ego right now, by saying, look at me, I still have the power to do this. I know that this is something everybody's going to hate, and now all the legal people are going to say I shouldn't have done this, and they've been saying I shouldn't do this, but hey, I'm doing it anyway. And what's going to happen? So
were you surprised by it? Because I was a little surprised. I was a little bit, because he hasn't shown this willingness with any of the others. So for me, my first response, being jaded and distrusting as I am of this guy, is that Stone has to know where the bodies are buried, because there's no reason I think Trump would have done this, because Trump's loyal to one person, Trump.
Yeah. For sure.
This shows a level of loyalty that Trump hasn't shown publicly, in my view, to anyone else. And I'm curious, why Stone?
Yeah, I think it's like you're saying. I think it's like he knows where the bodies are buried, and in many ways, his fate, Trump's own personal fate, is tied up in Roger Stone. Roger Stone is a figure who, has been there for decades, in the kind of behind-the-scenes shenanigans that the Republican Party does here and overseas. And I think his links to Paul Manafort, even Lee Atwater, there are ways in which not just Trump, but even very prominent members of the Republican Party are tied to Roger Stone, or he knows certain information about them. So I think in that sense, Trump is not only, trying to get this attaboy for, protecting his own self and showing that he still has the power to flaunt in front of his critics, but also as a means to, say to the Republican Party, these insiders, that, hey, sticking with me is still a good thing. I still can get us out of this stuff. And we can still basically crime while white. I think that's the message that he's sending. And it just shows that he really doesn't give a damn. I think at this point, there really is no level of shame. There's no level of conscience associated with anything he's doing. I don't think there ever was. I think that now he's reached a certain level of desperation that he doesn't have even the patience to listen to the voices around him that have been saying, no, you really shouldn't do this right now. Let's think of something else. They've been able to distract him with something else for so long, but now he's really scraping the bottom of the barrel. There's nothing else left to make him feel good about himself at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems all bad. And, if you're Trump, who clearly has a fragile ego, I think, anyway, and doesn't take, bad news well.
Right.
If you're around him, I can't imagine, the eggshells that you're walking on. And I don't know if you saw the story of Mark Meadows, the chief of staff now, who evidently they're trying to ferret out some of the leakers, because evidently the bunker thing really, if I'm getting this right, the bunker thing is really on Trump's mind a lot, because they're trying to find the leaker who said Trump went down in the bunker, because he did. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. In a moment if the Secret Service believes the president's life is in danger, their job, their sole function is to protect your orange behind and take you to safety.
But see, that's the element of him that knows it's overblown and knows that he looks very weak and fragile again. And he was mocked incessantly for that. So, and that's something that really stung him. Those are the things that you can really tell were blows to his ego, because he becomes fixated on it. He becomes obsessed, and he has to chase these, persecutory delusions he has about whoever's out to get him and who the leaker is, and is it the deep state, and is it Hillary, or is it Barack Obama? It just allows him to go down this trail of deflection where nothing is his fault. He isn't the one overreacting. He isn't overly emotional. It's never going to be about him. He can still just put it to other people.
Right.
And I think for him and Roger Stone, they've always had, again, this mafia folklore between them, where they just think about The Godfather, that imagery of us against the world, that there are these forces against us. And in the mafia world, theoretically these are legit forces. There really are people with machine guns. There really are people that are out to get you. And you don't actually pull your gun unless you're really going to possibly pull your trigger. And so I just think that he recognizes that he looks very petty, and he looks very small in having these very big reactions to things that are purely about his ego and his narcissism, and he looks stupid afterwards. And I think he feels like he has to do something to look better.
Yeah, well, I'm stupid before, during, and after, sure.
Right.
But, I found it interesting. And look, I'm sure all the administrations throughout history have done some level of trying to ferret out a leaker here or there. But evidently, according to the reporting, Mark Meadows is feeding disinformation all around to find out which leaker gives which to which reporter. And, as I'm reading through this, I'm going, is this something that's fake news that they're throwing out, that now we believe nothing that comes out of the White House?
Well, yeah, we shouldn't. It's hard to believe anything. I mean, I've lost track of how many times they've publicly lied. It's over 20,000, I would imagine now. So again, they have a pattern of habitually lying, and it would be insanity to believe them at this point, actually. But again, I do think that this is how Trump can spend his time. This is not just something he's done since January 20th, 2017. Again, what we learned from Michael Cohen and all of that investigation into what he actually did for Donald Trump over the years. This is what he did. He bullied people. He made threats. He investigated them. He stalked them. They got information on them. They used it against them. They used this kind of National Enquirer type, getting dirt on people, threatening to out them in tabloids, that type of stuff. So this is just the way he operates in his personal life. And so that's why it's not really surprising that he would, again, do that when he's occupying the White House. That's just how he functions.
It is who he is.
Yeah.
And finally, I wanted to get your thoughts on the big announcement today out of D.C. Evidently, the Washington football team has said that they're going to change the name.
Yeah, about time.
So does this mean that the Cleveland Indians have to change their name, the Atlanta Braves, Kansas City Chiefs? How far does this go?
Maybe it does need to go that far.
I'm okay with it. I don't care one way or another.
Yeah, I'm fine with it too. But again, I think that the seal is broken, and it's like we were saying, that's why it's hard to say when this is going to stop, because once you let the toothpaste out of the tube, how do you put it back in?
Yeah. Any suggestions on a name? I liked the kickbacks.
Oh, that's cute.
Somebody threw out the bribes. That was a good one. There were a couple others that were, that were probably not ready for, FCC airwaves. But any thoughts?
That's a good one. I like kickbacks. I hadn't heard that. I don't know. I'm not good at this kind of stuff. I think it should reflect the city. I think it's an opportunity, sociologically, for us to redefine ourselves as a country.
Right.
And so I think it'll be interesting to see how this gets crowdsourced and how they figure it out. But I think it would be, one of the first times that we do actually get inclusivity and hear from broad sectors of the public about what should be appropriate in the naming of these things.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to make any difference, though? I mean, because I've had these conversations where I don't care one way or another. I grew up in Cleveland. I grew up an Indians fan. I've gone to games. I follow them. It
Right.
doesn't matter to me one way or another. Do you think this is actually going to matter? Is it going to make people's lives better? Because I look at the end of this stuff where, okay, great, we'll have these symbolic moments, and I'm not diminishing the accomplishment of actually getting Washington to do this and the owner to do it, because he was dead set against it.
Right.
But I'm more of how are we going to make people's lives better, and will this do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I've been called to weigh in on in my role as a psychiatrist over the last couple of months as we've watched the traumatic events unfold and the social unrest is how do moments like this impact people from a mental health standpoint, particularly marginalized people, ethnic minorities. And one of the things that comes to mind in this discussion is how the subjective experience of discrimination, of racism, of oppression actually does have not just psychological impact, but physical impact. So literally being somebody who feels discriminated against every day can make your blood pressure be high chronically. It can predispose you to conditions like diabetes, conditions like asthma, even apart from your biology, from your genetics, just your social experience. So the idea that, a team not being named this offensive thing to that particular group of people, yes, maybe it doesn't change their socioeconomics in terms of how they get a job or whether they're able to keep their job or whether they're able, to get health care, et cetera. In terms of their physical experience of living in American society and feeling like, man, I live in a place that allows things to be called this, and I feel oppressed by this every day. And the weight of that psychologically and physically, I think will be lifted off of lots of groups of people as we even the playing field and have things be more politically correct and culturally sensitive.
Yeah. My only concern is that once it goes away, we never talk about these folks again, and their suffering and their troubles never get addressed. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as people move into positions of power, people who have never had those positions of power, it becomes harder and harder to do that. And that's why our vote matters. That's why representation matters. That's why actually taking a look at Congress and going, hey, maybe things aren't working for the majority of the population because the majority of the population is not 80%,
rich white
male
guys.
and white, right?
And rich.
Exactly, right? And if we were to actually have a government that reflects that we do actually have these large groups of all these different ethnic minorities that make a majority together in our diversity, then we would start to have that reflected in our laws and our policies, and then life would actually begin to improve for everybody else in society.
Yeah, which is why I've always said we should be tripling the size of Congress, not shrinking it down. You need more representation, not less. Because if I remember right, originally it was supposed to be one representative for 30,000 people. There are congressional districts where there's 1 million people in them.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's just something we need to do. But Jane, I appreciate the time. It's always good, always interesting and fun talking with you. Thanks so much.
You too. Have a great week and be safe.
You as well, our good friend Propane Jane. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. All in favor of the Washington football team changing the name? I kind of like the kickbacks. Kind of like it. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
So first of all, it's pumping out a tremendous amount of CO2, more than a city produces.
Siberian wildfires set a new pollution record. Atlantic hurricane season breaks new records. Trump administration approves natural gas bomb trains. Plus,
the National Resources Defense Council said that this mandate will lead to about $8.9 million in health savings between 2020 and 2040.
California mandates zero emissions trucks and buses by 2045.
All of those mandates and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You know, obviously the forest absorbs CO2. Well, if you take away the forest, it can't absorb CO2. So this is kind of a feedback loop. And releasing this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through the burning of these trees is actually warming the planet even more.
Cool. So in the previously frozen tundra of Siberia, we can no longer see the forest for the CO2. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I think hurricane season started about 5 minutes ago. But it's already breaking records? What?
Yes, it actually started on June 1st, but yes, the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season is already a history maker. Washington Post meteorologists warn it is likely to get worse. The Northwest Atlantic is abnormally warm, running about 4 to 5 degrees above average, and that heat energy formed Tropical Storm Edward, which on Sunday became the earliest fifth named storm ever recorded.
Wow.
Before Edward, Tropical Storm Dolly formed in a region where a June storm has never formed before. This week, at a station off the coast of Miami, Florida, sea surface temperatures hit an all-time high record of 92 degrees. Scientists link these warming oceans to man-made climate change.
I'm sure it'll all be fine.
The sixth named storm of 2020, by the way, will be named Faye, and that's not usually seen until September. So keep that in mind.
I will.
In Siberia, record high temperatures and drought have helped trigger intense fires for the second straight June in a row and are now setting new records for releasing carbon emissions that were also broken just last year. In 1 month, the Siberian fires have released as much carbon dioxide as the nation of Ireland does in a year.
Wow.
And a new study from Purdue University this week has found that ice on lakes in the Arctic is melting earlier than ever before, causing an increase in methane emissions, which is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide on short timescales.
So these are all troubling, self-reinforcing feedback loops. You have the fires are burning in the forest because it's too hot, but when they burn, they release more CO2, which makes it even hotter.
Yep.
This is not good.
No, scientists say that these alarming changes in the Arctic are actually unfolding decades earlier than they had predicted.
Get it right, scientists.
And it's not just the North. The South Pole is also warming fast.
Cool.
A recent study in Nature Climate Change concludes that parts of Antarctica are warming 3 times faster than the rest of the planet.
I'm sure everything's fine.
And a new study of tree ring data finds that South America has now seen an unprecedented increase in severe droughts and extreme rainfall events since the 1960s, which the scientists, surprise, attribute to man-made climate change.
Well, you know, I've recently learned if we didn't do all of these studies, we wouldn't have all of these problems.
In politics, remember the spate of exploding oil trains a few years ago?
Oh, I do.
With legal and regulatory battles hampering construction of new pipelines, the Trump administration has taken the final regulatory step to allow shipments of liquefied natural gas by rail. Previously, federal hazardous materials regulations prohibited shipments of liquefied natural gas by rail due to safety risks. It's a move opposed by environmental groups and 15 states as unsafe because of the dangers of a possible derailment, spill, or explosion in residential areas that could be catastrophic.
I'm sure it'll all be fine.
But some good news. A new study finds that spreading rock dust on fields helps to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. It actually draws it down in a process called weathering that binds CO2 from the air. The study finds that it's relatively cheap and can also boost soil health. Scientists say that transitioning away from fossil fuels is still required, but rock dust could be another tool to help us remove CO2.
Rock dust.
Yes, rock dust. And finally, here in the United States, in another first-in-the-nation move, California regulators have voted to require all trucks and vans sold in the state to be zero emissions by 2045 and getting to half of them sold in the state by 2035. That's to reduce deadly pollution at the nation's largest port in Los Angeles and to help address climate change. At least 7 other states and the District of Columbia may follow.
Cool. Donald Trump's not going to like that at all.
Nope.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I got an email from Marco Rubio. It wasn't really Marco Rubio. It was more like his campaign flack. But still, Marco claimed to have signed the email that I got. And he was shocked. It was shocking news. He's received shocking news because the Chinese Communist Party has officially sanctioned him and banned him from entering China because he spoke out against, and rightly so, against the Chinese and the things that they're doing. It wasn't just him. It was also Ted Cruz and the ambassador, Representative Chris Smith, and Ambassador for Religious Freedom, which I forgot we had one of those, Sam Brownback Mountain. As I've been saying, we're getting into an interesting moment in the election where China is going to be front and center. And what Marco wants you to do, what he was asking me to do, is to stand up to China by sending him money. I'm not going to do it, but I still want to stand up to China. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top news of the day, China being part of that, our good friend, former Congressman Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks. You want a quick China story?
Sure, hit me.
Okay. Went to China with the late Congressman Tom Lantos, delegation of 42 people back in 1996. And when we got there, we met with Jiang Zemin, the premier of China, right? And so we went to this, make a long story short, to this dinner. I had a Navy airman with me, and he actually spoke Chinese. And he said, they're talking about you. And I had said China should be contained. I don't remember where I said it. So they actually then brought up the issue. You said we should be contained. I said, well, in the sense that you are not playing fair, blah, blah, blah. When we got back, now this is 1996, so this is basically kind of pre-internet days. We got back and we searched and searched and searched for all the articles we used to clip every week. Where did I say this at? Was it the Washington Post, New York Times? It was the Caldwell Journal-Leader in Noble County, Ohio, population 10,000, which has a twice-a-week little journal it puts out. So the Chinese back in 1996 were clipping newspapers around the country, including the Caldwell Journal-Leader, which probably had a readership of 400 people.
No, look, it's not surprising to me.
How's that for impressive?
No, it's absolutely impressive and scary as hell, especially now that you consider the surveillance state technology that we have. Can you imagine what they know now?
Right. So I just thought I'd give you that little story that kind of woke me up a long time ago.
Oh no! So let me ask you: Would sending $25 to Marco Rubio help us in the fight to take on China?
No, he just needs to vote the right way, as many people do. No, he's going to be okay if he doesn't go to China. He's not going to lose his citizenship or his money. No.
Well, let's hope not.
But wish him the best to take them on.
Yeah, no, I mean that's for me the way to go. But it comes back down to money. I mean, you look at all of this money. I mean, there's just so much of it being thrown around and raised. I see that the Lincoln Project raised, what was it, like almost $17 million this quarter just to put out just snarky Twitter ads on against Trump.
Right, and what's very interesting about the project, of course, is that Kellyanne Conway's husband he's trying to put his wife out of a job. So I thought that was kind of interesting. You know, he's one of the main people. You've got the Lincoln Project. You've got an Ohio-based Matt Borges, former chairman of the Republican Party, who's now been actually thrown out, quote, as former chairman. Officially, he's part of another PAC, which is, I think, raised several $1 million. Very interesting to see these PACs, you know, and the Lincoln Project and the other the PACs that don't like Donald Trump, and they're genuinely run by Republicans.
No, I mean it's pretty incredible. I mean, just the amount of money. But you bring up Conway. Interesting as all can be, you know, as you've said, you know, a very interesting marriage and him trying to get her fired. You know, and I always thought, you know, James Carville and Mary Matlin were the most unusual couple possible. I can't imagine, you know, what it's like sitting across the dinner table from those two.
Yes, you know, Carville and Matlin, I knew them. I've actually, you know, been in the presence of both of them at the same time at a party, you know, where you kind of make a joke to them, you know, do you really fight at home and things like that. And that wasn't put on, you know, they had disagreements, but it is mild, you know, compared to what you see with this couple who, I mean, her husband is just genuinely, you know, overboard on trying to, you know, do something about Donald Trump, overboard in the sense that he's married to her. And I think that it's extremely combative. I thought Carville and Marianne were something. I think this one's the real deal.
Yeah, it's so bad. You know, the daughter, was all up, and I'm not getting into she's underage.
Right.
You know, but she was all upset because, you know, the parents wanted to, you know, silence her social media to keep her out of this back and forth fray.
Right.
Of which I was all in favor of. Look, you know, the parents should have some control.
Right. Sure.
You know, if that's you know, that's their wish, that's the way to go. But just a bizarre situation, and I guess
it is.
you know, it's telling of our times.
It is. It's very strange.
And it's not just, you know, the the former Republicans raising money against Trump. You've got the pro-Trump people raising a ton of money. What was this? America First Action raised like $23 million. So I mean, there's just tons of money being thrown around at this. You know what I would love to see? Some of this money being spent on infrastructure, maybe healthcare, maybe something useful.
Right, and you know the $23 million that they're dropping this summer on anti-Biden ads with this that you just mentioned. Now this is interesting. They publicly, and this is your state here, they publicly said this is the PAC for Trump against Biden, and one of the PAC officials today said, okay, North Carolina and Arizona may be the tightest, but then Pennsylvania and Wisconsin are seen as most secure. This is what they said today publicly. Now, if that is the case, that they see Pennsylvania and Wisconsin much more secure than Arizona and North Carolina, can somebody tell me why the money of $7.5 million is being spent in Pennsylvania, $5.6 million in Wisconsin, then $5.6 million Arizona, and $4.5 million North Carolina? So if Pennsylvania is so secure, why are they spending more money, $7.5 million, in a burst this summer in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I saw that. I'm going, yeah,
sure.
I'm with you. It's kind of upside down, but also the reason they do this is so that they can get us talking about the fact that they're going to be running ads in places like Pennsylvania.
That's true. You're right. And that's what happened.
You know, they're brilliant at getting. You know, Trump has been a master at getting tons of free media where everybody else has got to pay for it. He's always figured out how to get them to cover him for free.
Well, yes, and you know, I've been doing this for 10 years. And at one point in time, I was, doing 26 stations in a day. And, when Trump became president, I would actually, at some point in time, try to find other news, right?
Right.
And some of the hosts and ones that really didn't like Trump, this is back in 2017, would say, hey, I want more Trump information. It was almost like, for the right or the wrong of it, or whatever anybody thinks of, he controlled, 90% of what was out there in the media with his name, good or bad.
And I was saying this back in 15 and into 16 when the election was going on. The one thing, Trump cut his teeth in New York, where he figured out how to dominate the news cycle there. And if you could do it in New York, you can do it across this country.
Right, and he also did something. Look, I watched Newt Gingrich years ago, and others try to quote take on the media, right?
Right.
The national media. I watched it. and nobody could do it. Trump just continued to do it because he didn't care what he said, and he didn't care what they said. I mean, he didn't like it, but he just kept going with it, no matter what.
Yeah.
And, of course, if they would say, here's what you said, here's the video of what you said, he would say, well, that's fake news. I didn't say that.
Yeah,
that's not me.
You're right. I mean, because he's never been held accountable, and there's never been anything that you could hold over him.
Right.
This is that kind of weird world.
Right.
I did want to get your thoughts because you're my go-to expert on Iran. There was a story that ran today over at Axios that I wanted to get. I've been dying to get your thoughts on. Evidently, there's a China-Iran deal being floated around that they're talking about massive investments from Beijing and Chinese money going to Iran. They're going to build telecom and infrastructure and railways and all kinds of stuff in Iran, and basically undo all of the sanctions and stuff that we've put on. Is this the beginning of that next Cold War?
Well, it is, and the Iranians have been very smart, and China is, economically trying to put its fingers around the world. And the bottom line of this is, and this ties into one of the biggest mistakes President Trump ever did with John Bolton, but you had the Obama nuclear deal. The Obama nuclear deal rolled back the centrifuges. And in fact, George Bush had the chance to do that deal. I know because I was involved with it at the time, and I wrote about it in my book. And he wanted to do it, and then they had this fight, and the Cheney's group won in the White House, and they said no to the deal offered to them. Well, along came President Obama. He did the deal, right? And the bottom line of it, could it have been a more perfect deal? Sure, all right? And there was controversy about the money released and the sanctions, but the bottom line is Iran was contained. Then in came Trump. In the first year, he certified the Obama nuclear deal. Along came John Bolton. The rest is history. So he thought he had Iran at its knees. And now what's happened today? Iran is far from at its knees. It's now said, okay, fine. And again, the Iranian government is not a good government, but it said, fine, we're going to do a deal with China. And we can do our oil and we can do what we want. And China said, fine, we'll invest billions of dollars of Chinese investments in energy, undercutting completely the Trump administration's desire to isolate Iran. It is not now isolated. In fact, it's probably getting stronger.
So the question that I had is, what does this mean for the rest of the Middle East? I mean, because keeping them at bay has been part of our biggest part of our strategy. What does that mean for the rest of the region?
Well, what it'll mean for the rest of the region is that Iran again will be able to not be contained. It can basically do what it wants, and it'll look towards Europe to continue to see if it wants to do a nuclear deal. Because if Europe says yes, we're going to continue to do a nuclear deal, then it doesn't matter about what we want to do. But this obviously gives Iran more leverage than they've had in quite a few years, is what it's going to do. And, of course, anytime it becomes strong, the possibility of more disruption in the Mideast, Saudi versus Iran, the proxy wars, and further disturbances for everybody around the world.
And ultimately us as well. I mean, and this is probably one of those moments where, again, the Chinese are causing a bunch of trouble. And we're going to end up, because of the guy we've got there now, down the road less safe.
We are. And, the biggest mistake was to undo that deal. And then the other large mistake was to think that Iran would just sit there and take it. It reached out to Europe, et cetera. And then there was an option. Rand Paul went to New York and actually asked if the former ambassador of the United Nations, Zarif, would want to go to the White House. And then people in the White House found out about it, and they said, no, you're not coming to the White House. There'll be no communication. And again, finally, Iran, which again is a tough government that's not very good, but Iran said, fine, we will find a way around it, and that's what they have done. Now we have to sit back and say, are we on the outside, the inside? How do we really help for freedom in Iran? Do we continue to, ignore what they're doing, or do they now not need us and they will make disruption around the world, and it'll affect us?
Yeah, and finally, the last thing I wanted to get your thought on is Secretary of State Mike Pompeo today said that they're strengthening their policy towards China in the South China Sea. Evidently, Pompeo claims that China is completely unlawful and is its campaign of bullying to control the region there. this is kind of an about face. Now, what they're saying is we're going to, I guess, remain neutral in the territorial disputes, but basically Trump is, siding with all of the Southeastern Asian countries over China in this. What's this going to mean?
Yes, well, that's what he's doing. He's saying, Pompeo said that we're going to strengthen the policy in the sea, maritime claims, according to international law. We're going to reject Beijing's intimidation, he said. We noticed last week, of course, that he said, we're going to do sanctions because of how China treats Tibet. Well, remember, this is an administration for the first time where the Dalai Lama wasn't immediately welcomed, right, at the White House. And now they went to the point where all of a sudden they're saying, we're going to sanction you because of your policy of Tibet. Everything in the last 3 weeks has been China, 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 and this is a further pushing of the aggression. Now, I love aggression against China in a sense, but why is this all happening? Because you are going to see the tough on China, no matter what, Tibet, Hong Kong, etc., Trump, versus the I love China, Joe Biden. That's what's coming. That's what their ads are going to say.
No,
so a lot of this is preparation for the election to run the Joe Biden, lives in Beijing ad.
Yeah, and if you go back to, I think you and I had the conversation, well over a year ago when Biden said that, China's not a problem. I said that was going to jump back and bite him in the behind. It wasn't a good thing because, even then we were talking about this was going to be the central issue of this election.
Right, and I think what the Democratic side can do is, obviously not come out and say, well, we're going to
do, Bob, is, they need to get a plan to figure out what they're going to not be the party that says, if they're against China, we're for them. This is
and Biden needs
one of those
to be strong
moments
on it.
where ultimately they better come and get tough on it. Now, I had some interesting hope in that. The hope is that, with Biden's plan on manufacturing, with his plan on, bringing back some strategic manufacturing, that maybe this will help. And I guess we've lost Bob, so we're just going to move on. So I'm hoping one of those moments where the Democrats do come around, because I've been saying this for a while, and I've been taking heat from people going, no, if Trump's for, or if they're against it, we got to be against it. If Trump's against it, we got to be for it. I'm going, no, this isn't that kind of an issue. This isn't that moment. China is too important to allow someone like Trump to screw it up. And I said from the beginning, he found the nut. He was the squirrel that found the nut. And that nut was China's eating our lunch. They are doing everything that we will allow them to get away with. They are robbing, stealing, pillaging. They're doing all of those things. And, our corporations are happy with it because they're cashing in. They're buying all of our debt. They're buying our companies. They're literally buying us from within. They're going to win a war without firing a shot. And I said that over a decade ago. And again, it's not, being, smart. It's not being clairvoyant. It's paying attention. When factories in this country are boxed up and shipped and recreated somewhere in China, and the same products are sold back here on our shelves as American products, as the company that it was, and nobody knows the wiser, it's not good for this country. Now, a couple people got really wealthy, but communities lost, workers lost, and as a whole, our country lost. And this is where I'm hoping, and I'm glad to see that Joe Biden has come around we need to do some kind of strategic reshoring of manufacturing, especially the critical national security stuff. And there's a ton of it. So I'm happy to see that. But understand, China is going to be the issue that Trump's going to try to scare the bejeebus out of us with. Since evidently we're not scared of the virus. The surveillance state is very, very real. And it's something that we should all be very, very worried and concerned about. Anyway, if you've got any thoughts, I would love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, you can download the podcast there at the website, thericksmithshow.com, or get the app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.